This is the Sony 50-150 G Master. It's the first ever telephoto zoom with a constant f2 aperture. Now this thing is an absolute powerhouse, and it looks to become a staple for many high-end creatives, but it comes with a significant price tag. So is it worth the upgrade over the likes of the Tamron 35-150, the Sony 70-200, or even maybe a handful of primes? Let's find out.
It is early spring out here in Salt Lake City, which means one thing: cherry blossoms at the capital. We have roughly 3.5 business days before they are all gone. So that also means that basically half the population of Utah is here on a Friday afternoon. We have portrait photographers, we got people doing baby announcements, I saw some cosplay people. It's prom, I think, maybe, I don't know. There's a lot going on, but we do have Paige has agreed to help us model. We're gonna try out the 50-150 against the 70-200, and Paige has been nice enough to bring her 35-150, 2-2.8. These are all great portrait zoom options, so Paige is gonna help us do some portraits. Paige is a great photographer herself. She could probably do this a lot better than I could, but one way I can live up to Paige is we have Paige's husband, Lance, here to be the ultimate Instagram husband. He's gonna be holding the reflector for us. We got Jacob, AKA Portrait Poppy, filming it for us. Let's see what we can do.
As we're going throughout this video, I want to tell you about some of the things that I'm most excited about after shooting with this 50-150 for the last couple of weeks. But I also want to highlight some of the gripes I have with this lens. And as a disclaimer, Sony did send me a loaner of this lens, but as always, they have no say in what I say. And those who have been around the channel for long enough know that I always give my honest opinions about the gear that I use, and this video will be no different. Now, I know the first inclination is to compare this lens against the Tamron 35-150 f2-2.8. I mean, obviously, I've done this as well. I reviewed that lens when it was first released. I used to own one, and don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic lens, but it's definitely a different category despite having a similar zoom range. The Sony 50-150 is targeting the professional portrait, wedding, sports photographer, and videographer. Now, I'm not saying that you can't be a professional and use the Tamron, but you might see the 2 versus 2.8 and think,
oh, it's just a 0.8 difference, what's the big deal?
But that's a full stop of light faster. The Tamron also starts at f2, but that's only from 35 to 39 before it starts stopping down. So really, it's basically a 2.5 between 50 to 80, and then 2.8 from 80 to 150. That said, it's obviously natural for people to want to compare the two. So shout out to Paige for letting us test out hers. We'll definitely do more side-by-side comparisons of the image quality in just a second. But first, let's talk about the build of this 50-150. It's basically got everything you'd come to expect from Sony's G Master lenses. It's robust, it's got great weather sealing, it's got Sony's G Master coating that we'll talk about in just a second. It's also got a declickable aperture, iris lock, manual focus switch, 3 programmable focus hold buttons, and a full-time DMF on and off switch. However, you'll notice that there are a lot less switches compared to what you'd be used to on other white Sony lenses. There's no focus limiter switch, there's no mode switch, and perhaps most upsettingly, there's no optical steady shot switch either, which is my first gripe. Now, maybe Sony figures that this lens is fast enough and the focal range is short enough that that isn't necessary given the improvements that Sony's made to in-body image stabilization. And like in practice, I never noticed any image shake in my testing, but I'd love to have that peace of mind knowing that this lens can help me out in low light situations, for example, and all other Sony telephoto lenses do this, so why not this one? Speaking of, to be honest, I wish this wasn't white. Typically, telephoto lenses are white for heat management purposes because they're used for outdoor sports and wildlife and things like that. While this is sort of a telephoto lens, that shorter focal range and the wider aperture make it better for more indoor and court sports where heat management isn't really an issue. So I personally would have preferred this lens to be black. Maybe with it being a little bit of a gray area of a lens, maybe it should have been gray. I don't know. Now, you also might notice that this boy's thick, like it is girthy. So it's coming in at 1,340 grams, 200 millimeters long, and 102 millimeter diameter. For reference, this is basically the same length as both the 70-200 GM version 2 and the 100-400 G Master. It's a little bit lighter than the 100-400 and a little bit heavier than the 70-200, and then it's larger and heavier and longer than the Tamron. But despite being a little bit bigger, I'd say that the weight distribution is actually quite nice. It feels pretty well balanced. And it has an internal zoom, and the zoom throw is super short, so you can really quickly just kind of switch your focal length with like one finger while you're shooting. Another important warning, however, and another gripe, this is a 95mm filter size, and it's a coarse filter thread, which means that the gaps in between the threading are a little bit wider than your standard 95 or just standard filter thread. This is also true of the 28-70 G Master. That's also coarse, and I think it's also true of the 200-600. Now, Polar Pro makes coarse filters. I think other companies do as well, but you've been warned because I got my filter stuck on the 28-70 that Sony lent me because they don't make this clear anywhere. So I'm warning you now, coarse 95 filter thread.
The issue with this being like the most photographed place in all of Salt Lake right now is we're gonna have to hide this guy because no lenses have this. So we're just gonna gaff that up, and now everybody thinks it's 70-200. Nobody's gonna know. So we're gonna have Paige lean against this tree. There's not too many people behind her here. There's still a lot. We're gonna have our work cut out for us in Photoshop here. Generative fill is gonna be our friend.
That 11-bladed constant f2 aperture, it's awesome. Similar to the 28-70 G Master f2, this lens produces creamy, delicious bokeh, and the cherry blossoms, they really help to show off how impressive it is.
All right, so we have this nice little spot here. We have these cherry blossoms kind of coming down low. Most of them are up high, but that allows us to frame Paige in the center. So we have some foreground separation, and then we have the kind of tunnel of other cherry blossoms back there. So Paige, I'm gonna have you scooch just one touch that way. Yeah, perfect.
So just looking at some of these images from 50mm all the way up to 150, you're basically getting background separation and rendering that's near that of a prime lens. When you compare it against the 70-200 G Master version 2, I mean, it's nice and all, but the 50-150 definitely stands apart. The 28-70 has proven to be super popular because while it's optically an exceptional lens, it also has great character and rendering that actually just make it a little bit of a step above the Holy Trinity of G Master version 2s. And now that we have two lenses with this f2 aperture set, I'm very much hoping that this means we're getting a different type of Holy Trinity to round it out. Like, we want that wide angle. Sony, if you're listening, I've been asking for a 20-50 f2 on this channel for years. And then we compare it against the 35-150.
A little bit less of a like character on the bokeh, you can already tell. Like, it's less swirly on this one.
The rendering and sharpness and the bokeh differences become pretty apparent, and now maybe you're understanding why perhaps it's not fair to really compare the two.
I mean, it's nicer to get a little bit wider on this one because this one goes all the way to 35, but it is, in this instance, it's actually worse sometimes. And then when we zoom out, we can get to f2, but then we zoom in, it gets darker. Can we get some, can you show Lance just absolutely crushing it out here? I mean, look at this. You can't teach this. Just killing it. It's a good test of flaring on the lenses here because we got this flare that's coming in from the side, and we'll see if it can hold up some contrast.
The 50-150 honestly handles it about as well as you could ever ask for. We're obviously letting some of the light in, but there's minimal discoloration and lens flares, and we're still maintaining a lot of that sharpness and contrast on Paige's hair and face.
Oh, sensor's open, oh no!
Now, if we compare that against the Tamron, you can see in this backlit scene, there's some secondary green flaring coming through, and then you'll notice how washed out the image is getting, especially around the details of Paige's face.
Okay, we're gonna go lefty and just let autofocus do its thing. Oh yeah, there we go. Step a little half step to your left. Right there, yep.
With the 70-200 GM2, it does a much better job controlling the flare. So we don't have that green coming in and that discoloration, but we do lose a little bit of the contrast, especially when compared to the 50-150.
Tam showed up to keep us some company. Okay, drop.
At this point, Paige started to get offended that I was ragging on her Tamron lens, so we decided to venture over to the backside of the Capitol to this little bench here. This gets us away from the crowds and that direct backlit scene to make it a little bit more fair to compare sharpness when it doesn't have to fight against those flares. This little bench scene ended up being one of my favorites of the shoot, partially because it's easier to get a shot without like a billion people in the background.
Yeah, let's go gold, but so like, see how like there it's like 2 on her face? Let's go like here. Yeah.
The sharpness on the 50-150 is honestly incredible. It's pretty much on par with almost any prime that I've tested. Like if you told me that this was an 85 or a 135 prime, I would totally believe you. To the point that it might make a whole lot of sense if you're like a wedding or portrait photographer to just swap out your 50 or 85, your 135 in exchange for one of these instead.
Wait for this little group to go. Perfect.
Compared to the Tamron, you can definitely see a difference in quality, but like honestly, it should be given the price, and we'll get there in just a second.
Going to 35 is nice, I will admit. Especially for this scene, we get a little bit more context. It'll look totally normal to everybody else. Huh? All right, so we're gonna have you lean back like this, and then I'm gonna shoot it there, going this way. It'll look cool, maybe.
Now, the 50-150 is also rocking 4 of Sony's fancy XD linear motors to move around all those big old lens elements. Plus, being a native Sony lens, that means it can keep up with the A9 III and the A1 II from a burst rate and autofocus perspective, and from a high frame rate perspective in video.
We're gonna go speed boost mode because the 50-150 is a native lens, so we can go 30 frames per second. Tamron can't do that. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Again, you might not think this makes a huge difference, but even a pretty static subject with some just moving little flower petals dropping by, the 50-150 was easily able to keep Paige's face perfectly in focus while shooting at 30 frames per second on the A1 II. The Tamron, on the other hand, not only is it limited to just 15 frames per second shooting, but I also missed focus quite a few times.
That's gonna be a pain to go through later.
Good news, the 70-200 was able to keep up and never miss focus, so if you're sitting there clutching your precious 70-200 Mark II, no worry, you don't need to throw it in the trash yet. One reason you might not want to throw it in the trash, let's take a look at the rear element here of each of these other telephoto lenses. You'll notice that the 70-200 and the 100-400 both have a large space between the final rear element and the lens mount. But if we look at our 50-150, that element is flush up against the mount.
Bokeh, why does that matter?
Well, that gap is to accommodate for a teleconverter. So while you might be sitting here thinking you have this nice fancy 50-150 and you can convert it into a 50-300 with the 2x teleconverter, you're out of luck because it is not supported by this lens. Now, another concern, this lens is priced at $3,900. Now, I have no idea what this is gonna mean with tariffs or not tariffs. That's a moving target. The price might be different whenever you're watching this. My understanding, however, is that most Sony lenses are manufactured in Thailand, so hopefully this won't be too much more expensive. I don't know. Either way, make no mistake, this is a very steep price, especially when you compare against the alternatives like the Tamron 35-150. I do think we've shown, however, that the 50-150 greatly outperforms the Tamron, but I think it's really hard to justify more than twice the cost. It's also substantially pricier than the 70-200 GM version 2, which, like, the performance is much closer on this, but I definitely do prefer the image on the 50-150. But if you're comparing it against a set of equivalent primes, say the 50-1.4, the 85-1.4 Mark II, the 135 1.8, that would run you around $5,200 or so. Like, the truth is, this is a premium lens for a premium creative. If it fits your use case, if you're doing weddings, like, this is a great value that you're getting. But I'm curious to know if this is something that you think you might add to your kit. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.